My name is Natalie Carter, and I can tell you the exact moment everything I believed about family died. People think betrayal comes with shouting or broken plates or dramatic scenes that you'd expect to see in a movie. But the truth is, the deepest betrayal I ever experienced came wrapped in silence. The type of silence that hits you before the truth does. The type that tells you something is wrong even when no one is speaking. It was early morning, still cold enough that the air had that soft bite against your skin. I drove to my parents' house the same way I always did, taking the curves on Maple Drive without even thinking, counting the same houses on the left like I had since I was a teenager. I didn't expect anything unusual. I didn't expect the floor under my life to shift. I didn't expect to question everything I knew about the two people who raised me. I just wanted to drop off a grocery haul for my mom because her back had been hurting the week before. I had texted her the night before asking if she needed anything. She never replied, which was a little strange, but not strange enough to worry me. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same. White siding. Brick steps. The little ceramic frog my mom insisted on keeping even though its paint had chipped off over the years. Everything looked normal. That was the part that got me. Betrayal is sneaky like that. It hides inside familiarity. I grabbed the bags from the trunk and walked up the steps, balancing everything against my hip while trying to fish my keys out of my purse. I found them, smiled a little at the ridiculousness of my multitasking, then slid my key into the lock like I had thousands of times before. Except this time, it didn't fit. At first I thought it was my angle. The bags were heavy. My hands were cold. Maybe I was rushing. I tried again, slower. The key scraped but wouldn't turn. I flipped it over, even though I knew that wasn't the issue. It still wouldn't turn. A tiny confusion flickered in my chest, like a spark from a lighter that doesn't fully ignite. I tried again. Nothing. I stared at the key in my hand like it had betrayed me personally. Then a thought came, small but sharp. Did they change the locks? For a moment, I refused to believe that. It didn't make sense. Why would they? There was no reason. None at all. So I knocked. Lightly at first, the way I always did. No answer. I tried again. Louder. Still nothing. My heart picked up. Not racing. Just tightening. That feeling you get when you step into water that's a little too cold. I knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the lock clicked from the inside. The door opened 2 inches. Only 2. Just enough for me to see my dad standing there. Except the look on his face wasn't the look a father gives his daughter who came to visit. He didn't smile. Didn't act surprised. Didn't act confused. He looked tired. And bothered. As if I had interrupted something. Dad, I said slowly. Why is my key not working? He shifted, blocking most of the doorway with his body. He didn't hesitate. Didn't stumble over the explanation. That almost hurt more than anything else. He had prepared for this moment. Natalie, you can't come in right now. I blinked. The grocery bags felt heavier. What do you mean, I can't come in? What's going on? He sighed. That long, disappointed sigh he used to give me when I came home late in high school. Except this time, it wasn't disappointment. It was guilt. And annoyance. Together. We made some changes, he said. You should have called first. It's not a good time for you to be here. A cold wave washed down my spine. Not a good time. As if I was some neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. As if I wasn't his child. As if I didn't grow up behind the door he wouldn't open. Dad. Did you change the locks? He looked away for half a second. Just long enough to answer the question without speaking. When he looked back, his voice was firm. Yes. We did. The cold settled deeper. Why? He cleared his throat. Your brother needs stability right now. Lucas. Of course. Every disaster in my family could be traced back to one name. Lucas. My older brother. The golden boy. The son who could do no wrong no matter how many times he screwed up. The prodigal child who created infernos and expected everyone else to put them out. I tried to process it. You changed the locks because of Lucas. Dad straightened, as if bracing himself. We're reorganizing the house. We've decided it's best if you don't come by unannounced anymore. It makes things complicated. Complicated. I felt something inside me crack. Not break. Breaking is loud. This was a quiet crack. A hairline fracture no one else could hear. Dad, this is my home too. His expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. Not anymore, Natalie. He closed the door. He closed the door on me. I stood there on the steps, holding grocery bags that suddenly felt like cinder blocks, staring at the door like it might swing open again and reveal some kind of joke. But it didn't. The house remained still. Silent. Cold. A home is not just wood and paint. It's memories. It's childhood laughter. It's arguments and forgiveness. It's footsteps running down the stairs on Christmas morning. It's safety. It's belonging. And in one sentence, my father told me I no longer belonged there. I walked back to my car slowly. The grocery bags dug into my fingers, but I didn't really feel them. My mind was numb, like someone had flipped a switch inside me. When I got home, I set the bags on my kitchen counter and just stared at them. The lettuce. The chicken broth. The blackberries Mom loved. I had spent money on things for people who locked me out. I curled onto my couch, pulled my knees to my chest, and stared at nothing. The more I thought about it, the deeper the betrayal felt. My mother didn't come to the door. My father didn't invite me in. They chose Lucas. Again. They always chose Lucas. But changing the locks. That was different. That was intentional. That was final. I tried to call my mom. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. My hands shook. I wasn't sure if I was angry or sad or both. I barely slept that night, replaying the moment my dad said, "Not anymore, Natalie." The next morning felt like walking through fog. I tried to work. I tried to eat. I tried to think. But the moment kept replaying. The door closing. The locks changed. The coldness. The rejection. That afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered hesitantly. Hello. A calm male voice responded. Good afternoon. Is this Miss Natalie Carter? Yes. My name is Daniel Hall. I represent your parents in several legal matters. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you regarding recent changes to the family estate. Estate. Another cold wave rolled through my chest. My parents had changed the locks. Now their attorney wanted to meet me. Something inside me whispered the truth before he even said another word. This wasn't a random call. Something was happening behind my back. Something big. And they didn't want me to know. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, my pulse loud enough that it felt like it echoed inside my head. An attorney calling me about my parents' estate didn't make sense. They weren't wealthy. They weren't dying. They weren't planning anything dramatic, at least not that I knew of. And yet the word estate landed heavy, like the first hint of a storm hiding behind a thin line of clouds. I cleared my throat. What kind of meeting? Mr. Hall's tone stayed calm. A brief review of documents they recently finalized. Your presence is required. Required. I sat up straighter. Why wasn't I told about any of this? I'm not sure, he replied gently. But I can assure you, Miss Carter, the documents concern you directly. My heart thudded once, deep and low. When I asked when the meeting would be, he offered the earliest slot. Tomorrow morning at 9. It felt sudden, almost urgent. But something inside me, something more instinct than thought, told me to accept immediately. I wrote down the address, thanked him, and hung up. For a long time, I didn't move. I stared at the spot on the wall where sunlight was hitting it just right, a warm golden patch that should have been comforting. But all I felt was unease. The kind that settles under your skin and refuses to leave. That night I tossed in bed, replaying everything from the past week. Every unanswered text. Every cold glance when I stood at that locked door. Every excuse my parents had ever made for Lucas. Every time I was told to be patient with him, be kind to him, be understanding of him. And now this. Locks changed. Attorney calls. Estate planning. And my name in the middle of it without anyone telling me why. I arrived at the law office early the next morning, parking in a spot overlooking the wide glass windows. The building was modern, all steel beams and sharp edges, nothing like the warm little suburban world I grew up in. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and new carpet. The receptionist smiled at me politely when I gave my name. A moment later, she led me to a conference room. Inside, a tall man with neatly combed gray hair stood from his chair. He extended his hand. Miss Carter, good morning. I'm Richard Hall. His handshake was firm but not intimidating. He motioned toward the seat across from him. Please, sit. We have a few things to go over. I slid into the chair, my stomach twisting. He opened a large folder and organized a few papers into neat stacks. Then he looked at me with a calm expression that somehow made me even more nervous. Your parents asked me to finalize several transfers and trust management documents on their behalf. They signed everything over the last few months. I blinked. Months. They had been planning something for months. Without telling me. Without even hinting at anything. Mr. Hall continued, these documents were recently recorded with the county. It seems you were never informed, which is unusual. Unusual. That was the polite way of saying, not normal at all, and we both knew it. He slid the first document toward me. I read the heading. Property title. As my eyes skimmed the lines, my breath fainted out of me. Current owners, Daniel and Margaret Carter. New owner, Natalie Carter. My name. In black ink. Next to the words, new owner. I looked up, confused. They transferred the house to me. He nodded. Correct. They signed this several months ago. But they changed the locks. They told me I couldn't come in. They said Lucas needed stability. Mr. Hall's brow furrowed. That doesn't align with the legal record. Your brother has no ownership, no rights, and no authority over the property. Nothing here indicates he was ever intended to have any. My head spun. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Mr. Hall gently set another paper in front of me. This document names you as successor trustee. Upon their passing, you assume full legal control over all assets under their trust, property, finances, accounts, investments. I swallowed hard. They didn't tell me any of this. He tilted his head sympathetically. They insisted you already knew. Anger began to mix with confusion. I whispered, they told me I didn't belong in the house anymore. Mr. Hall blinked. That makes no sense, considering you are the sole title holder. I felt my breath tighten. So they gave me everything. And then locked me out of my own home. Why? Why would they do that? Mr. Hall read my expression and spoke softly. If you do not mind my saying, Miss Carter, family dynamics are often complicated. But legally, you are in complete control. They cannot take the house from you. They cannot revoke these transfers without your signature. You are protected. Protected. I didn't feel protected. I felt played. He gently pushed one more set of papers toward me. These are duplicates of all the original documents. Your parents requested that you be given physical possession of everything. I stared at the stack. Heavy. Thick. Full of signatures that changed everything. Mr. Hall added, "If you have any questions, I'm here to help in any way I can." I nodded stiffly. "Thank you. I need time to understand this." Of course. When I walked out of the building clutching that folder to my chest, something in me changed. I'm not sure I can even describe the feeling. It wasn't panic. It wasn't relief. It wasn't grief. It was something in between. Something like awakening. For the first time, I had clarity. My parents had not made a mistake. They had not forgotten to tell me. They had deliberately misled me. They had taken the house away publicly, in action and in humiliation, while simultaneously giving it to me legally in secret. It didn't add up. Unless the person controlling the narrative wasn't them. Unless it was Lucas. That thought settled in my stomach like a burning coal. I sat in my car for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel tightly before finally starting the engine. The drive to my parents' house was slow, deliberate, with each passing street sharpening the anger I had swallowed for years. Every time Lucas had demanded more. Every time they had given him what he wanted. Every time they told me to understand his behavior, forgive his mistakes, support him, help him, be patient with him. I pulled into the driveway. Lucas's truck was parked in his usual crooked angle. I turned off the car, stepped out, and walked up to the front door. This time, I didn't knock. I inserted the key from the attorney's envelope. The lock turned smoothly. The bolts slid open. I stepped inside. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, I heard voices from the kitchen. My mother. My father. Lucas. They were arguing about something. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Tension. Blame. Panic. I walked toward the kitchen slowly, the folder still in my hand. When I turned the corner, the room froze. My mother gasped softly. My father's face drained of color. My brother's expression snapped into pure annoyance. Lucas crossed his arms. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the folder and placed it on the table. Calmly. Controlled. A gesture that made him falter. Mom whispered, "Natalie." Dad swallowed hard. "We didn't expect you." I looked at all three of them. Then I said the sentence that cracked the room wide open. "I went to see your attorney." The blood drained from my mother's face. My father closed his eyes. Lucas stepped forward, almost aggressively. "Why would you do that?" I nodded slowly, letting the silence drag for a moment. "Because I wanted to see what else you were hiding." Lucas stiffened. Mom stammered something about misunderstandings. Dad tried to explain that things were complicated. But I didn't let a single one of them continue. I opened the folder, pulled out the title, and read it aloud. Transfer of ownership to Natalie Carter. Their reactions were immediate and telling. Mom covered her mouth with shaking hands. Dad stared at the floor. Lucas's jaw clenched so tightly the muscle popped. I laid the document flat on the table. "This house is mine." I said it quietly. Calmly. But in that moment, I held more power than I ever had in my life. The silence in the kitchen was deep enough to feel. It pressed against the walls, against the air, against my skin. My parents stared at the title on the table like they had never seen it before in their lives. But they had. Their signatures were right there. Clear. Smooth. Intentional. Months old. No hesitation in a single line. Lucas was the first one to react. Quickly. Aggressively. Loud enough to mask the panic cracking through his voice. That has to be a mistake, he snapped, pointing at the paper like it personally offended him. Dad, tell her that's not final. Tell her this is only temporary. Dad didn't answer. I looked at Lucas. Really looked at him. The same brother who used to steal money from my dresser when we were kids. The same brother who wrecked my mother's car and convinced her it was her fault for giving him the keys. The same brother who had been coddled, defended, rescued, and rewarded every time he messed up. He had never faced a consequence he couldn't talk his way out of. And now, for the first time, he was staring at something he couldn't spin. Lucas pointed at me again. This is fake. It has to be fake. You forged it. You're trying to trick them. I felt the smallest smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Not from humor. From clarity. Real, razor-sharp clarity. I slid the second document toward him. The trust document. The one naming me successor trustee and executor. I said quietly, read the signatures. He snatched it off the table, scanning the page. When he saw our parents' names printed under the final lines, his mouth fell open slightly. Mom whispered, Natalie, please, let us explain. I looked at her, my voice steady. I'm listening. But she didn't begin. She looked helplessly at Dad, who couldn't look at either of us. Dad rubbed his forehead and finally spoke, not to me but to Lucas, like he always had. Son, sit down. Lucas didn't move. He stood there trembling with anger, glaring at the papers like they were bombs waiting to explode. Dad tried again, stronger. Sit down. Lucas sat. I stayed standing. I wanted them to look up at me for once. To see me without looking through me. Dad took a deep breath. When your mom and I signed these, things were different. We were scared about the future. We wanted to protect the family. I raised an eyebrow. By giving me the house and then locking me out of it. Mom's voice cracked. That wasn't supposed to happen like that. We thought we had more time. We thought we could talk to you before the documents were finalized. I leaned forward slightly. They were finalized 6 months ago. Mom swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. We know. We didn't know how to bring it up. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is more honest than words. Dad finally met my eyes. Your brother was struggling. He had nowhere else to go. He needed structure. We needed to help him. That is why we changed the locks. We wanted the house to feel stable for him. There it was. The truth, laid bare in its ugliest form. They gave me the house. Then gave Lucas the power to kick me out. Because they couldn't bear to say no to him. Lucas huffed, trying to regain control. I needed a place to stay. I needed room. They told me the house was mine to manage. They told me you didn't need it. That you had your own place. That you were fine. I shot him a sharp look. You don't get to decide what I do or don't need. Lucas shoved his chair back and stood. Everything is always about you, Nat. You think you deserve everything Mom and Dad have just because you helped out sometimes. You think you're better than everyone. I didn't break eye contact. I don't think I'm better. I think I worked harder. I think I showed up. I think I kept this family running while you burned everything down and expected applause for the ashes. Mom pressed her hands together. Please, stop fighting. We can fix this. We can sit down and make a new plan. Something that works for everyone. I looked at her, and something inside me softened for a brief moment. She genuinely believed she was fixing things. She genuinely believed that if she said the right comforting sentence, Lucas and I would suddenly stop being who we were. That everything would snap back into place. Then I remembered standing on the porch while she hid in the kitchen. The softness evaporated. I said calmly, "There is no new plan. There is only the one you already signed. And the one I now enforce." The room froze. Dad tried again. "Natalie, don't do this. Lucas needs help." I turned toward him. "So you decided you would sacrifice me?" No one answered. Because the truth didn't need words. I took a slow breath. "When you changed the locks, you humiliated me. You made me stand on my own childhood porch like a stranger. You told me I didn't belong. You replaced me with him. Without even telling me. Then you lied to my face." Mom whispered my name. "Natalie." I held up a hand. Not yelling. Not shaking. Just done. I walked around the table and stood directly in front of Lucas. He tensed immediately. His face twisted with resentment, that familiar expression he wore whenever he didn't get his way. I said, "You need to get your things and leave." He blinked at me. Hard. "What?" "You heard me. This isn't your call," he snapped. I didn't move. "It is. Legally. Completely. And permanently. You have no rights here. None at all." His eyes widened with panic. He turned to our parents. "Mom, Dad, tell her she can't kick me out." Mom's face collapsed into heartbreak. "We can work something out. Natalie, please, don't push him out into the street." But Dad didn't interrupt this time. He stayed silent. Staring at the documents. At the signatures he put there. At the consequences he didn't expect would walk through the front door. Lucas looked back at me. His voice cracked slightly, rage mixing with desperation. "You don't understand. I need this house. I finally have a place that feels steady." I kept my voice level. "Then you should have thought about that before locking out the person who actually owns it." His face twisted. "You wouldn't." I stepped closer. "Try me." Lucas inhaled sharply, trembling with fury, but under the anger was something unfamiliar. Fear. "You're serious," he said quietly. I nodded once. "You have 1 hour." His anger exploded. "You can't treat me like this. I'm your brother." I straightened my shoulders. "And I was your sister when you changed the locks. Funny how that didn't matter to you then." Mom covered her mouth as if holding in a sob. Dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Natalie. Please." I turned toward them. "The title is mine. The trust is mine. The decisions are mine. You didn't want me involved until now. Now you have no choice." Dad looked hollow. Drained. Lucas's voice broke. "Nat, please. I'm asking you as family." I shook my head once. "Family doesn't lock you out and watch through the blinds." A quiet, deadly silence filled the space between us. Lucas realized he had no power. No leverage. No control. And worst of all, no claim. He stormed out of the room, shoving past me, muttering curses under his breath. Mom hurried after him, trying to convince me to reconsider, begging me to be patient, telling me he was struggling. But those arguments meant nothing to me anymore. Not after everything they had done. I stayed in the kitchen, my hand resting on the title, the thick paper warm under my fingers. For the first time in my entire life, I felt something fierce settle inside my chest. A new version of myself. A version that wasn't stepping aside. A version that didn't flinch. A version that would never let anyone lock her out again. I stayed standing in that kitchen long after Lucas stormed out. The house felt different now, like the air itself had shifted. This place that once felt warm and familiar now felt like a courtroom, and I was standing in the center of it with all the evidence in my hands. The title. The trust. The power. And the truth, finally lit in a room where no one could look away. Mom returned first, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Dad followed behind her, slower, careful in his movements, like he was afraid the wrong step would make everything collapse even further. They both hovered in the doorway, unsure how close they were allowed to get. Dad spoke first. His voice had lost all the authority he carried earlier. "Natalie, please sit down so we can talk." I didn't move. "You didn't want to talk when you changed the locks." He flinched. "Your mother and I didn't think you'd take it this way." I stared at him. This way. Like I was overreacting to being locked out of my own childhood home. Like I was supposed to smile and say thanks. Like humiliation was a reasonable expectation because Lucas needed stability. Mom stepped forward, voice cracking. "We didn't know how to balance things. Lucas, he was going through something. He said he needed space. He said you were too judgmental. He said," I cut her off sharply. He said. When did either of you ask what I needed? What I wanted? What I deserved? Silence. Not a single answer. Not a single excuse that didn't crumble under its own weight. Dad sank into a chair, his elbows resting on his knees. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "We were trying to protect both of you." I blinked in disbelief. "Protect us? By locking me out? By lying to me? By supporting him at the expense of everything else?" Dad shook his head slowly, staring down at the floor like the truth was carved into the tiles. "We didn't think you needed protection. You were always the strong one." There it was. The sentence that had shaped my whole life without me ever noticing. "You're strong, Natalie. You'll be fine. You'll figure it out. You'll manage. You're responsible. You're dependable. You're mature. You can handle it." Strong children are punished for their strength. They receive less care, less attention, less support. Because people assume they don't need it. I felt something inside me twist sharply, painful and sudden. A realization that I had carried the weight of this family while my brother was carried by it. Mom's shoulders sagged. When we told Lucas he could stay here, he seemed calm for the first time in months. We thought giving him space would help him start over. "We didn't think," I interrupted again. "You didn't think. That's the problem. You didn't think about me. You didn't think he'd use that power against me. You didn't think he'd twist the situation. You didn't think he'd convince you to shut me out. You just listened to him." Again. Dad rubbed his eyes. "Natalie, please. We made mistakes. We know that. But we can fix this. We're a family." I stepped forward and placed my hand on the title document. The weight of it felt different now. Heavier than paper should be. I said, "You can't fix this with words." Dad stood slowly, the panic in his voice now unmistakable. "Natalie, this isn't who you are. You're not a cruel person." I lifted my eyes to him. "I wasn't. But you created someone else when you locked that door." He opened his mouth again, but I held up one finger. "Just one." And he stopped. Behind them, I saw Lucas appear at the end of the hallway. He wasn't packing. He wasn't gathering his things. He was waiting. Watching. Listening. Waiting for them to fight his battle, like he always did. I saw right through it. I spoke louder this time so he could hear every word. "You have 1 hour to clear out your things. If you're still in this house after that, I call the police, show them the title, and you leave in handcuffs." Mom gasped. Dad stared at me like I had slapped him. Lucas took 2 steps forward, his face red, furious, desperate. "You wouldn't dare. I breathed in slowly, letting the air fill my lungs with the cold clarity I now lived in. Try me, Lucas. Mom burst into tears. How can you do this? How can you treat your brother like this? I stared at her. You changed the locks on me. That is how. Lucas stepped closer, pointing at me like an accusation. You're punishing me for something Mom and Dad did. I laughed softly. No. I'm punishing you for what you wanted them to do. Lucas froze. Because in that moment, the truth settled across his face like a shadow. He had wanted this. He had wanted me gone. Mom collapsed into a chair. Dad put a hand on her shoulder. For once, he didn't defend Lucas. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the realization that everything he had tried to hide was now lit up in daylight. I stepped closer to Lucas. You thought you could take everything from me. You thought Mom and Dad would hand you my life, my home, my history. You thought I'd stay quiet. But you forgot something. I don't need their permission to exist. You needed their permission just to function. Lucas's jaw clenched. You always think you're better than me. I whispered, I don't think that. I know it. His face twisted. He lunged toward me, but Dad grabbed him again, holding him back. Dad's voice broke. Lucas. Stop. But Lucas didn't stop. He pulled away, pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair like he was trying to rip the situation apart with his fingers. He turned to our parents. You're just going to let her do this. You're going to let her kick me out. Dad didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, it was the softest, saddest thing I'd ever heard him say. We already gave her the house. Lucas's knees almost buckled. Mom reached for him. Son. But Lucas stepped back, out of reach, breathing like he had been punched in the ribs. He looked at the floor, at the documents, at me, and then at the door. You're cruel, Natalie, he spat. You're enjoying this. I shook my head slowly. No. I'm not enjoying it. But I'm not apologizing for finally choosing myself. Mom sobbed harder. This isn't you. This isn't our daughter. I turned toward her, feeling a weight lift off my chest that I had carried for far too long. This is the daughter you created. The daughter you ignored. The daughter you replaced. And the daughter who is done sacrificing everything so your son can ruin his life without consequences. Dad whispered my name, trembling. Natalie, we love you. We don't want to lose you because of this. I walked toward him. You lost me when you locked me out. I'm just giving you the paperwork that makes it official. He closed his eyes. Behind him, Lucas grabbed his coat and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. His truck roared to life, tires screeching down the street. Mom covered her face and sobbed. Dad didn't move. I walked to the front door, shut it quietly, and locked it. This time, with my hand. With my key. With my ownership. I turned back toward my parents. They looked small. Worn. Defeated. And maybe a small part of me felt pity. But pity doesn't erase betrayal. Pity doesn't erase humiliation. Pity doesn't erase the moment they chose him over me without thinking twice. Dad finally spoke. What happens now? I looked at both of them with a coldness I had earned. Now we rebuild everything without lies. Without secrets. Without choosing one child over the other. But we rebuild it my way. On my terms. In my house. Dad nodded slowly. Mom wiped her face, trembling. Natalie, can we still come here? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was heavy. And final. You can come, I said quietly. But you no longer live here. Not emotionally. Not legally. Not by default. If you want a place in my life, you earn it. You don't demand it. Mom broke down again. Dad stared at the documents, then back at me, realization settling in like dust. You're not the little girl anymore. I exhaled softly. No. I'm not. And I never will be again. The house felt quieter after Lucas left, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My parents stood there in the living room, looking at me. The way people look at a person they thought they understood but now realize they never really knew. I carried the folder with the title and trust documents upstairs to what used to be my old bedroom, not because I needed to put them anywhere specific, but because I needed a moment to breathe in the truth of everything. I set the folder on the bed, glanced around at the faded yellow walls, and felt a strange mix of grief and power settle over me. I had spent years walking on eggshells for Lucas. Years choosing peace over fairness. Years shrinking myself so he could feel bigger. And now, for the first time, I stood in the center of a life that was legally and emotionally mine. When I walked back downstairs, my parents were whispering to each other. The moment they saw me, they straightened up like students being caught doing something they should not. My dad cleared his throat. Natalie, your mother and I feel awful about how things happened. We know we made mistakes. We know we didn't handle things the right way. I stopped a few feet away from them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I spoke the way the new version of myself needed to speak. Calm. Clear. Final. Then why did you lie to me? My mother's face crumpled. We didn't lie, honey. We just waited for the right time to tell you. I looked at her without blinking. The right time would have been before you changed the locks. Before you told me the house wasn't mine. Before you handed Lucas the power to lock me out. My father exhaled, long and slow. We thought he needed help. He was falling apart and we thought giving him the house would stabilize him. I tilted my head slightly. The house you secretly transferred to me. My mom wiped her eyes. We never meant to hurt you. I nodded once. That doesn't erase what you did. They both froze at that. Because even though they expected anger, they weren't prepared for certainty. Dad stepped forward carefully. We want to fix this, Natalie. We want things to be peaceful again. I let out a small, humorless laugh. Peace isn't built on lies. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy. Then my mother whispered, "What do we have to do?" I studied them. Really studied them. Their posture. Their guilt. Their confusion. Their fear. And beneath all of that, their desperation not to lose me the way they had lost control of Lucas. You tell me the truth, I said quietly. Every detail. Every conversation. Every promise you made him. Every lie you didn't correct. Every time you supported him instead of standing up for me. Every reason you thought he deserved to take what you legally gave to me. You tell me everything. Mom swallowed hard. Natalie, why? Because I can't rebuild anything on half-truth. And I can't forgive something I don't fully understand. They looked at each other. Then my dad nodded. And they told me everything. They told me Lucas had been manipulating them for months. Telling them he needed a place to start over. Telling them I didn't care about them the way he did. Telling them I had my own life and didn't want theirs. Telling them I would never fight for the house because I didn't value it. Telling them they were hurting him by not giving him a chance. They admitted Lucas cried in the kitchen when I wasn't around. Begged them to let him stay. Said he would lose his mind if he didn't have the house. Said I made him feel judged. Said I made him feel worthless. Said I was too successful, too distant, too harsh, too independent, too stable. They told me he twisted every kindness I offered into an insult he could use for sympathy. My mother broke down again. We just wanted to help him. We didn't see what he was doing until now. We didn't realize how cruel he was being to you. My father rubbed his temples. We didn't expect him to change the locks. We didn't expect him to lie to you. We didn't think he'd try to take over. I took a slow breath. Then here's what happens now. They both straightened. Afraid. Hopeful. Waiting for their punishment. Lucas is gone. He stays gone. If he tries to come back, you tell him the house belongs to me and he is not welcome here. Dad nodded quickly, relief flooding his face. Yes. Of course. Mom whispered, what about us? I held their eyes. You can visit whenever you want. But understand something. You don't get to make decisions for this house anymore. Not one. Not a lamp. Not a chair. Not a room. Not a conversation. You will respect my home the way you expected me to respect yours. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dad whispered, we understand. I stepped closer. And the next time you choose Lucas over me, remember this moment. Remember what it felt like when you lost the right to open your own front door. Because if you do it again, I will walk away and I won't come back. Neither of them argued. Neither of them even breathed loudly. They knew I meant it. And here is the part of the story that still hits me every time I think about it. They listened. They changed. They apologized. Not perfectly. Not immediately. But they tried. Because losing the child they took for granted scared them more than any consequence Lucas ever faced. 2 weeks later, my father called to tell me Lucas had been begging to come back. Crying. Promising he would change. Asking for his room. Dad told him no. Mom blocked his number after he screamed at her for choosing me. And for the first time in my life, I saw what accountability looked like in my family. Not explosive. Not emotional. But clear. Firm. Fair. And enforced by the one person who had always been expected to swallow her pain. I didn't swallow anything anymore. The house became mine in every sense. I painted the walls. I fixed the banister. I replaced the locks again, this time with a digital system only I controlled. I filled the rooms with things that mattered to me. Photos of people who loved me without conditions. Books I grew up reading. The quilt my grandmother made when I turned 16. And every time I walked through the front door, I felt something inside me heal. Not because I won. But because I chose myself. I chose the version of me who wasn't small. I chose the version of me who wasn't silent. I chose the version of me who wasn't afraid to enforce consequences. If you listened until the end, thank you. And if anyone ever tried to shut you out of your own life, I hope you remember this. You are not helpless. You are not replaceable. You are not invisible. You can reclaim everything they tried to take. Stay with me. Like this video, subscribe. And turn on notifications. I've got more stories for you, and I want you with me for every one.